What if I told you that a 1986 body horror film about a scientist turning into an insect actually predicted every major concern we have about genetic engineering, biotech experimentation, and the ethical boundaries of human enhancement today?
Something went wrong, Seth.
We're going to take a look at a movie that got dismissed as disgusting special effects porn, transformed a cheesy 1950s B-movie into psychological nightmare fuel, made audiences physically sick while breaking their hearts, and ended up being a terrifyingly accurate warning about the hubris of playing God with human DNA. Yes, it's time to explore why The Fly was decades ahead of its time, and we all missed the bioethics lesson while focusing on the gross-out effects. Now, before we dive into why everyone focused on the vomit instead of the message, we've got to understand what Hollywood and science were doing with genetic research in 1986. And trust me, it was a completely different world than the CRISPR gene editing reality we live in today. Picture this. It's 1986, and genetic engineering is pure science fiction for most people. The Human Genome Project hasn't started, cloning seems impossible, and the idea of editing human DNA is something that only exists in laboratories and speculative fiction. Most Americans' only reference point for genetic manipulation was The Island of Dr. Moreau or cheesy monster movies. Enter David Cronenberg, the master of body horror who had already disturbed audiences with Videodrome and scanners. The guy understood better than anyone how to use physical transformation as metaphor for deeper anxieties about technology and human identity. When he decided to remake the 1958 B movie, The Fly, he wasn't interested in creating another monster movie. He wanted to explore what happens when scientific ambition collides with human frailty. The original film was typical 50s atomic age paranoia. Scientist gets mixed up with fly, becomes monster, must be destroyed. Cronenberg's version was something entirely different, a meditation on disease, aging, mortality, and the ethical boundaries of human experimentation. He turned a simple monster story into sophisticated bioethics horror. The timing was everything. This was 1986. Genetic research was happening in universities, but public awareness was minimal. The ethical implications of genetic manipulation seemed like distant philosophical problems, rather than immediate practical concerns. So what happened when The Fly buzzed into theaters on August 15th, 1986? Well, let me put it this way. Critics and audiences were so focused on the spectacular gross-out effects that they completely missed the sophisticated bioethics commentary underneath. The reviews were overwhelmingly focused on the physical horror. Roger Ebert praised the makeup effects, but warned audiences about the film's disgusting imagery. Most critics spent more time describing the transformation sequences than analyzing what Cronenberg was actually saying about scientific responsibility and human enhancement. The marketing didn't help either. The trailers emphasized the shocking body horror and Chris Wallace's incredible makeup effects, while downplaying the emotional and philosophical depth. Audiences came expecting monster movie thrills and got genuine tragedy wrapped in spectacular prosthetics. I remember my dad renting this on VHS and the whole family being simultaneously fascinated and repulsed by Brundlefly's transformation. We were focused on the technical achievement of the effects work while completely missing the deeper themes about scientific ethics, human enhancement, and the consequences of unchecked experimentation. The film was making serious points about bioethics and scientific responsibility, but everyone was too busy being amazed or disgusted by the transformation effects to notice the sophisticated commentary underneath. But here's where things get really interesting, and why I think The Fly deserves recognition as the most prescient bioethics film ever made. This grotesque body horror movie accidentally predicted almost every major ethical debate we're having about genetic engineering and human enhancement today. Let's start with the big one. Genetic experimentation and unintended consequences. Seth Brundle's teleportation research goes wrong. because he doesn't fully understand the technology he's working with. His rush to human testing, his failure to consider all variables, and his assumption that he can control biological processes perfectly parallels current debates about CRISPR gene editing and human enhancement research. Sound familiar? Because we're currently watching scientists edit human embryos, enhance cognitive abilities, and modify genetic code with only partial understanding of long-term consequences. When researchers accidentally create genetic changes that pass to future generations, when enhancement experiments produce unexpected side effects, when biotech companies rush treatments to market, they're repeating Seth Brundle's fundamental mistake. The film's depiction of gradual transformation is remarkably accurate to how genetic therapies actually work. Brundle doesn't instantly become a fly. He experiences slow, progressive changes that affect his personality, behavior, and physical capabilities. Today's gene therapy patients report similar experiences: gradual alterations in cognition, metabolism, and physical function that change their fundamental sense of self. But it gets even more prophetic when you look at the enhancement aspects. Brundle initially experiences increased strength, stamina, and the exact benefits that modern enhancement research promises. The film understood that genetic modification would be marketed as human improvement rather than medical treatment, and that people would willingly accept unknown risks for perceived advantages. The biotech industry parallels are everywhere. Brundle works alone, bypasses ethical oversight, and treats himself as the primary test subject. Today's biohacking community follows exactly this model. Entrepreneurs experimenting on themselves with genetic modifications, bypassing FDA approval, and promoting unregulated enhancement technologies. The film even predicted the social implications of genetic enhancement. As Brundle transforms, his relationships deteriorate, his humanity becomes questionable, and society struggles to define what he has become. Current debates about genetically enhanced humans raising similar questions. Would enhanced individuals be considered the same species? How would society treat people with artificially improved capabilities? The Fly understood that genetic engineering would raise fundamental questions about human identity, scientific ethics, and the boundaries between improvement and transformation. The film was asking the right questions about biotech responsibility 35 years before we were ready to confront them. So why did everyone miss these incredibly prescient themes? Simple. We weren't scientifically or ethically ready for this conversation about genetic manipulation and human enhancement. Think about what genetic research looked like in 1986. DNA sequencing was expensive and time-consuming. Genetic engineering existed mainly in bacteria, and human gene therapy was theoretical. The idea that people would routinely edit their own genes, enhance their children's DNA, or modify human biology for improvement seemed like pure fantasy. The 1980s optimism about technology made it impossible to see what The Fly was really warning about. This was the era of technological solutions to human problems, when most people believed that science would inevitably improve human life. The concept that genetic research could be dangerous, unethical, or socially destabilizing was outside mainstream thinking. The scientific establishment wasn't prepared for bioethics debates either. Medical ethics focused on traditional issues like informed consent and doctor-patient relationships. The idea that genetic modification could fundamentally alter human nature, create new forms of inequality, or raise questions about species identity was completely foreign to most medical professionals and researchers. Religious and philosophical institutions struggled with the implications too. Traditional moral frameworks had no precedent for evaluating genetic enhancement, human-animal hybrids, or artificial evolution. When Brundle becomes something between human and insect, the film was exploring territory that theology and philosophy hadn't yet mapped. The media landscape couldn't handle these concepts effectively. Science journalism was less sophisticated, bioethics wasn't a mainstream concern, and genetic engineering was rarely discussed outside academic circles. The vocabulary for discussing genetic modification ethics simply didn't exist in popular culture. The body horror context created additional barriers. Audiences expected Cronenberg films to be weird art house experiences rather than serious bioethics commentary. When a movie features someone vomiting digestive enzymes and losing body parts, it's hard to focus on sophisticated ethical implications. The timing was just all wrong. The Fly needed an audience that understood genetic engineering, had experienced biotech controversies, and could imagine the ethical dilemmas of human enhancement. Instead, it got 1986 audiences who saw a gross monster movie and moved on. The modern vindication. But here's the beautiful irony: everything. The Fly warned us about regarding genetic engineering and bioethics is happening right now, and suddenly that disgusting monster movie doesn't seem so far-fetched anymore. We're living in Seth Brundle's world. Scientists are editing human embryos with CRISPR, entrepreneurs are experimenting with genetic enhancement, and biotech companies are rushing experimental treatments to market. When researchers report unexpected genetic changes, when enhancement experiments produce dangerous side effects, when biohackers inject themselves with unregulated genetic modifications, we're experiencing exactly what The Fly predicted. The bioethics debates are no longer theoretical. Gene editing raises questions about human identity, enhanced individuals challenge social equality, and genetic modification blurs the line between treatment and enhancement. The film's vision of gradual biological transformation affecting personality and behavior perfectly describes how patients experience genetic therapies today. The film's core questions: how far should we go in modifying human biology? And what are the ethical boundaries of genetic experimentation? Are no longer philosophical. They're practical, urgent, and being grappled with by scientists, ethicists, and policymakers around the world. The Fly asked what would happen if we developed genetic modification technology without considering the ethical and social consequences. 38 years later, we're finding out. So there you have it. The Fly, the movie everyone dismissed as gross-out body horror, was actually the most prophetic bioethics film ever made. While we focused on the spectacular makeup effects, this film quietly predicted the genetic engineering debates, enhancement controversies, and biotech ethics questions that define modern medicine. The tragedy isn't that The Fly failed to warn us. It's that we failed to listen while we were being disgusted by the transformation sequences. Today, as we grapple with CRISPR ethics and genetic enhancement, we're living in the world Seth Brundle created. Thanks for watching. Hit that like button if you think genetic engineering needs better oversight, and let me know in the comments. Would you risk genetic enhancement for superhuman abilities?